And welcome everyone. We are so grateful to have you here today. And I'm just going to put a link in the chat to our booklet for today. And so if you'd like to look at that and look at any of the resources in there, feel free. And I see some questions already about accessing the recording. Don't worry. We'll be sharing that in an email tomorrow. So let's go ahead and get started. My name is Jen, and I'm an educating librarian at the Center for Brooklyn History at Brooklyn Public Library. And before we dive into our workshop today, I want to acknowledge that Brooklyn Public Library's Center for Brooklyn History stands on land that is part of the unceded ancestral homeland of the Lenape Delaware people. And so as a sign of respect, we recognize and honor the Lenape Delaware nations, their elders past and present, and future generations. We are committed to addressing exclusions and erasures of Indigenous peoples and confronting the ongoing legacies of settler colonialism in our work. Let's take a moment to get to know each other. And I'm actually going to open up a poll here. I'd love to know, in our first poll, where you are joining us from today. Are you based in New York City, New York State, somewhere else? If you respond somewhere else, you can feel free to put that in the chat. We'd love to know. Oh, I see lots of responses coming in. Awesome. And let's take a look at the results here. A little over half from New York City, a third from the rest of the state somewhere, and 10% from somewhere else. Awesome, very cool. And again, if you feel up to sharing where else you're from, we'd love to know. Our second poll, we would love for you to share what grades you mostly teach: elementary, middle school, high school, something else. And again, with that very open-ended something else, feel free to let us know in the chat what that is. And oh, I see folks from New Jersey, North Carolina, Alaska. You win the faraway prize. That's amazing. So let's take a look at the results here. The largest percentage is high school, but almost as many elementary, lots of middle school. I love how we have like good representation of lots of things here. Amazing. Undergrad, teacher, fantastic. Okay, and then we have one more poll, and I'm just wondering what subject area you mostly teach. You teach ELA, social studies, are you a school librarian or some other kind of librarian, or do you teach something else? All right, let's look at these results. Mostly something else. I love it. And I see in the chat we have lots of student teachers. Cool. Science teachers. But we do have a fair number of ELA and social studies teachers here too. So awesome. Thank you for being here with us. So as a brief overview of what we're doing today, I'm doing this little welcome, and then I'm going to pass things off to Rachel Wallman, the Director of Education at Greenwood Cemetery, who's going to lead us through a rediscovery of Margaret Pine. She'll introduce us to Margaret Pine, and we will spend a lot of time thinking about her life and analyzing primary sources related to her life through a variety of different activities. Our objective today is to gain insight into teaching with primary sources and leading students in critical engagement with historic narratives, and gain content knowledge about Greenwood Cemetery, 19th century local history, and historical record keeping. So we hope that you will leave with resources and lesson plan ideas to further interrogate historical narratives with your students in your classrooms. Also, I know that some of you here are interested in receiving CTLE credit for this workshop. We will share a survey link at the very end of the workshop for you to give feedback on the workshop. Also, that will be the way that you can indicate if you'd like CTLE credit and give us the details you need for that. As a little disclaimer, for any of you in this workshop today, and for anyone who attended our teacher workshop on Tuesday, it is going to take us longer than normal to get you your CTLE credit. Our colleague who usually does that just had to go on leave for 2 weeks, but we will get that paperwork to you the week of April 5th. Please don't worry, it'll come your way. A few virtual housekeeping things. You can add your name and pronouns on Zoom. So after you're in Zoom with us now, you can look at the Zoom menu and click on the participants icon. This will open a list of names. And if you hover over your own name, you can click on rename and then add your name as you would like it to appear and your pronouns. Because we are in a virtual world today, I also want to give a few little disclaimers. Today is not the day that technology is smiling too much on any of us. I know Rachel's been having a few little weird audio things, and my Wi-Fi hates the rain, and it's raining a lot where I am, so bear with us. I think we're going to be fine, but we never know what'll happen when we're online together, right? One other thing I would like to point out about Zoom is that we have enabled closed captions for this workshop. So if you click on the CC closed caption button at on your Zoom menu, that will open up a transcription as we go. We are really committed to making all of our workshops and learning opportunities accessible to everyone. If you have other accessibility concerns, feel free to send us an email to connections@bklynlibrary.org, and we will be in touch with you. Also, this session is being recorded. So if you have your camera on at any point, that signals that you are willing for that small video in your camera to be recorded. If you don't want any of your face or anything to be recorded, please leave your camera off. You can still feel free to participate in the chat because we will not save the chat. And so if you have comments that you want to make, you can just put them in there and we'll read them out loud. I also want to touch on our code of conduct. Our events are intended to create a space that nurtures a community of educators that is inclusive of all, regardless of race, ethnicity, gender identity, religion, age, sexual orientation, ability, or stage of professional development. And so all attendees here today are expected to show respect to presenters, organizers, and other attendees. We ask that you actively listen, be sensitive, and show support. Attendees who violate this code of conduct will be removed from the Zoom session. So that is all from me to start with, and I'm going to pass things over now to Rachel Wallman, who is the Director of Education at Greenwood Cemetery. Thanks for being here with us, Rachel.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me here. Thank you to all the teachers who are joining us and all the other educators, whatever role you play in your school. Thank you so much for coming today. You know, this is such an extraordinary time. You're showing up to an extra thing, so that's very special, and I hope this is worth the time that you're spending on it. We're going to be doing, I think, a very interesting exercise today. I hope an interesting exercise today in going through the process of developing a historical narrative about a person's life, about whom there has not been a lot of professional research done. And we're going to see where a process like this can be done in the classroom, and where you can use the example of a person for whom just sort of the base amount of foundational research has been done to teach students about the process of historical thinking and the process of building historical narrative from the perspective of looking at sources to discover not only what we do know, but what we don't know. And we're going to learn about that today through the life of a woman named Margaret Pine. And I'm going to share my screen now, take you through a little talk about Pine, who she very vaguely is, because we're going to learn more about her through sources. Yeah, so first, this presentation is called The Buried History of Margaret Pine, Reexamining a Life and a Gravesite. All right. So I'm coming to you today as the education director at Greenwood Cemetery, and my role at Greenwood is to work with schools, specifically K through 12 schools, some pre-Ks as well. And And that's sort of an unconventional job for there to even be at a cemetery. So I just wanted to start by asking you guys, and you can type this in the chat, answers in the chat. How would you complete this sentence? A cemetery is a place to, in your opinion. Take a minute to just write some stuff in the chats. Honor a life, remember, reflect, respect. Remember. So I'm seeing a lot of ideas about remembering mourning, burying people, learning, thinking, relax and contemplate. Keep, visit, find the last rest of people that are part of our history. So I love these responses, and they really strike at the point that I will make through a couple brief slides about how a cemetery is a lot of things. It's a place to do many things. So first and foremost, it's a place to commemorate. And of course, the most traditional way that we commemorate, honor, and respect lives in a cemetery is by burying people and being a home, a permanent home for the bodies of our lost loved ones. But I also wanted to include commemorate in a broader sense. This is a photograph here of a procession that happened annually, or would happen annually apart from pandemic times, for the Battle of Brooklyn, which part of which was fought in Greenwood. That's the first major battle of the American Revolution. And part of that battle took place on land that is in Greenwood, and we commemorate that battle every year. So this is actually a photo of a march up to our battle hill. So we commemorate more than just individual lives at Greenwood. We also commemorate events and sort of history broadly, American history broadly. The cemetery is also a place to recreate and contemplate. So this is a picture of an event, a big family-friendly event we have around one of our glacial ponds, sort of almost a circus atmosphere. And it honors the life of someone at Greenwood, William Niblo, who owned a pleasure garden in the 19th century where such performances would take place. And he used to picnic at Greenwood and loved hanging out in Greenwood with his friends in life so much that he bought the land that he picnicked on for his elaborate mausoleum. And so we honor his life through celebrating and having fun and playing games at a certain time of year. And of course, I wouldn't be here if a cemetery weren't a place to learn. So we run programming at Greenwood about American history, art history, and nature. Greenwood is a natural environment to study all of these intersecting topics. We run programming, as I said before, for pre-K through 12, and even for teachers, professional development like this that we've done on site. You can see down on in the right here, these are teachers from John Dewey, if anyone's here from John Dewey today. Your social studies staff has visited before. So I hope that this is a valuable learning experience. And I want to kind of introduce you to how we learn at Greenwood. What are some of our techniques for approaching history through a cemetery? So we're going to do that through the life of Margaret Pine. And I'm only going to try to tell you the very basics about who Margaret Pine is now, because we're going to learn so much more about her by looking at sources. Oh, first, let me tell you a little bit about Greenwood's history, though I haven't done that yet. So Greenwood's past. Greenwood was founded in 1838. It is a rural cemetery. That is a term for cemeteries that were created in the 1830s, inspired by those in Europe, like Père Lachaise in Paris. Greenwood was the third, I believe, rural cemetery in the United States. The first is Mount Auburn in Boston. And the idea of Greenwood was to be a place where you could bury the dead, but where it was also very natural and lush and almost like a public park before there were public parks. And in fact, Greenwood inspired the creation of Central Park and Prospect Park and other places like that, because when Greenwood was established, the largest public park in New York City was only 10 acres big. And you had an exploding population, you had disease outbreaks, you had little tiny graveyards and churches that were overflowing. So we needed both burial space and green space in the city, and Greenwood fulfilled both of those and was actually the most popular tourist attraction in America in the 19th century, except for Niagara Falls. So right from our start, we've been a place where you can both bury the dead and have a good time visiting. It's always designed to be that. It wouldn't be as gorgeous as it is and is with winding paths and all kinds of beautiful monuments if we didn't want people to actually visit while they were alive, not just for a funeral and not just become a permanent resident there. So this is a very early view of Greenwood that you're seeing here before there were many monuments on the grounds. This is from around 1840. That was the year of our first burial. And today, here is a drone shot of not even all of Greenwood. We started out as 278 acres. We are now 478 acres large. And that is just a little bit smaller than Prospect Park. Prospect Park is 526 acres. So we are just an unbelievable jewel of a green space in Brooklyn and in the city generally. And right down in the middle of this photo, you can see our main entrance gates at 5th Avenue and 25th Street. And you walk in and you're in another world. So it's an incredibly special place. There's a perception also at Greenwood that only the wealthiest are buried there. It's just for the rich and famous. And there certainly are famous people buried at Greenwood, people like Jean-Michel Basquiat, famous 20th century artist, Boss Tweed, going to a very different end of the spectrum, a villain of 19th and early 20th, or no, just 19th, really, I think he died in the 19th century New York, Samuel Morse, inventor of Morse code, but more than half of our burials are actually burials in the sections of Greenwood called our public lots, which are on the border of the cemetery. And those are just average everyday people who couldn't afford lavish family lots with space to bury 10 people, or giant mausolea carved into a hillside, which are called crypts, where you could bury sometimes for the Steinway family, I believe that's our largest mausoleum on the grounds, and you can fit over 200 people in that. You're not even going to fit that many Steinways in there. There just aren't that many Steinways left. Steinway is in the piano company, folks. So Greenwood is a place for everyone to be interred. And it's still operational now. We are both an active cemetery and a site for public programming. So it's a very busy place with lots of things going on. How do we learn cemetery or history at Greenwood? So we approach learning history through first and foremost examining the monuments on site. We think of history almost backwards. How is a person remembered? What is this object here that is dictating this person's legacy? And how do we work backwards from that understanding of them to understand their lives? And how does the other evidence of their life, other primary source materials, compare to the way that they're remembered on their monuments? So we look at, when we're with students on site and in virtual programs, we look at monuments, we look sometimes at cemetery records, and we look at additional primary sources from our collections, from other collections, to flesh out the story of a person's life and see, are they remembered? How do we feel like they're remembered? Today, what is our view of this monument now versus what the view of that person's monument may have been in their own lifetime? I'm also seeing in the chat here that some people have family at Greenwood. So that's lovely that there's that family connection here. So what are monuments? When I say that, we probably think of monument as being some grand thing in a public space that lots of people visit and pay homage to, something like a war memorial. But monument in Greenwood terms are just a marker at a gravesite. So they're distinct from mausoleums or crypts, which are larger, but a monument is considered to be a stone marker or some other type of material marker at a gravesite that is not like a building. So here are a few examples of different monuments, and you can see that these monuments all convey very different information about a person. So we've got Basquiat's over here on the left. A little hard to read because of the type of granite, and I think it may have been rainy that day, but it says Jean-Michel Basquiat, artist, and then his birth and death dates, and that's it. Students are often very surprised to see that this is all he gets, because we think, oh, Basquiat is so famous, he must have a really elaborate monument, but he does not. And then in the middle, we have a monument put up by, this is a tragic monument by a husband and wife who were pioneering physicians, pediatricians, and yet who I believe lost 7 of their own children in infancy. So this is a monument that just says the babies. I mean, it's unbelievably tragic what that conveys with just 2 words. And then on the right here, we have a monument that was erected in the memory of a man who is interred there. He was a Civil War soldier, and we see on his monument all the battles that he fought in. His daughter is also buried here. And so we see information about him, about his daughter, and this was erected by his troop, not by his family. So that the kind of information that is preserved on this monument has something to do with who put it there. Now let's start talking about, first, how do we interrogate monuments? Okay, so first we want to know what information is on a monument. And we then want to ask, can we tell who designed this monument? So was it surviving family? Was it the government? Was it a private organization? Who do we think put this thing up? Because it can be different people depending on who the monument is for. Who is the audience for this monument? Is this a monument that only loved ones were ever thought to visit? We put up this gravestone, and whoever put it up thought the only people who will ever come and see this are family members. Or did they think the public would be visiting? Did they know that this person was a public figure and expect it to be visited by the public? What does its design and material tell us about the person who's being memorialized? Is it a very small, modest monument? Is it made of an expensive stone or mix of materials? Does it have an elaborate design? These are some things that can tell us something about the person, their taste, their station in life, their economic position in life. What is the condition of the monument? That can tell us, did they pay for perpetual care of the monument? It can tell us more honestly about the material in some instances, because sometimes monuments look ancient just because they're a very fancy material like marble that weathers a lot because of the elements, or is it a sturdier material like granite? And the biggest questions that we ask students that we think are the most important for developing historical thinking skills, the ability to analyze primary sources like a historian, are we ask students when they're looking at monuments, what do you actually know about this person from looking at the monument? What are facts about them that are listed here? Or at least things that are positioned as facts? What are things we can infer from what we're seeing on the monument? What are our guesses, basically? Teaching, I'm sure you guys know this better than I do, teaching children to distinguish in their thought processes between things they know and things they think based on the evidence that they're taking in is difficult. And we ask students what their questions are. So how do they turn their inferences into questions? Because history is nothing without questions. We don't know how to do research if we don't know how to develop a question to direct our research. So we always hammer home this language when we're looking at monuments with students. Now to Margaret Pine. Margaret Pine is buried in the lot of the Van Zandt family. So this is the Van Zandt family lot. I'm going to show you the borders of it right here. So what are you noticing? Let me take a second and Jen, I don't know if you ever do like people talking. I don't know if the crowd is too big for that, or we can just use the chat, but I would love to ask what people just notice about the lot itself, this grouping of monuments here. What do you notice about this lot?
Yeah, folks can use the chat, and I've also just turned on the option. If someone would like to share something out loud, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Okay, so I'm seeing one very large monument, small ones around it. The large one is not centered. There's lots of space left. That's deceptive because there are actually quite a lot of bodies under the ground there. There's small monuments around the big one. Expensive versus cheap stones is something that we're maybe guessing. Is it on a slope? Does that have to do with hierarchy? Excellent thing to wonder. Lots of, again, we're noticing that there's one large stone and lots of smaller ones.
Yeah, was she like a mom and then buried her children?
That's an excellent thing to wonder. What do you see that makes you wonder that?
Well, the size of the monuments. So one's larger and then the others are much smaller. They're all actually, it looks like different sizes, but smaller.
You're right. Yeah, because so good noticing that they're all different sizes. And I like that your inference that there is one like head of a family and other people who are around her. Maybe she had to bury her children. And you are absolutely right that it is common for children to have small gravestones. in older cemeteries like Greenwood that's been around for 183 years. Before the 1940s, when we had the onset of antibiotics, child mortality was so common, and small gravestones are traditional. In this case, these are largely not children's graves, I don't believe. Are they really that close to each other? One stone looks like a veteran stone. There are many veteran stones in Greenwood. Okay, so I'm going to tell you where Margaret Pine's grave is. And I will also say that I don't know a ton about the other people who are buried here. I know that Charles Van Zandt, I believe, is buried here, and his daughter is. I can't remember how old she was when she was dead, but I'm really going to focus on Margaret Pine for the rest of this. And this monument, this one is hers, this one with the little pointy corners. So let's take a closer look at that. This is what Margaret Pine's monument looks like today. So can you know or infer or wonder anything about her based on this monument? Just a picture of this. And feel free to type something in the chat. Nothing. Larry says nothing. It's blank, right? It's a blank stone as far as we can tell. She was erased. Has the name worn away, or was there no name? Excellent question, Patricia. I hope everyone doesn't mind that I'm using first names, because I can't say everybody's pronouns. So either it's unmarked or whatever was marking has worn away. She passed away a long time ago. Excellent. There's coins on the corner. So we're noticing that people are leaving things for her. Those are contemporary coins, right? Was this erosion? Janice maybe is asking. It was either an older monument or it wasn't preserved. So, okay, excellent. Maybe it gives us a date, and the headstone was made based on the material. Okay, so these are excellent things to infer or to wonder. She's buried with the family, but she's placed in the back, significant enough to have a stone, and buried with the family, but not where the name is shown. So let me give you a little bit of information about this stone. This was actually a stone that we didn't even know was there for a while. Initially, this stone, when we first heard about Margaret Pine, some visitor to Greenwood or some researcher contacted us asking, hey, do you know about Margaret Pine? I believe she's buried in your cemetery. And they said the lot that because you can go on our website, you can do a burial search and you can find a lot number of where somebody is. And they said, okay, she's buried here. And when our team, this is maybe 7 or 8 years ago, went and looked for her, there was no headstone at all. But we have an excellent restoration team on our grounds that care for our stonework. And they thought, you know what, maybe she did have a stone. Let's look underground and see if it fell and was buried. And that is exactly what happened. So this stone actually was placed at her death, and it did have an inscription on it, but it fell over time. It wore away. It's made of marble, which was a beautiful, glistening, white, expensive material to make monuments out of in the 19th century. Unfortunately, marble is a terrible material to be outside. It will weather and wear tremendously, so and erode a ton with rain and with wind. So it eroded enough to fall over. There's also lots of trees at Greenwood that mess up the ground and create uneven ground over time as things settle. It fell over, it got buried over time, so the actual monument had to be unearthed. And by the time that had happened, it was illegible. But we were able to do a rubbing. And this is something I will say right now, we ask visitors never to do, because it can only erode stones further. And there's also a chance that any monument at Greenwood, no matter how sturdy it looks, can fall over on you. And it has happened to people before where a monument has fallen on them. And these things can weigh 1,000 pounds. So please don't ever do a grave rubbing at Greenwood or any cemetery unless you ask. But this is what we saw when we did a rubbing. And it's very hard to read, but we were able to do a transcription of this, at least what we believe to be the correct transcription of this. And I should also say that any monument that's placed at Greenwood is the property of the lot owner. So we don't have records. We don't keep records of what every monument says because it's not our property and we didn't put it there. So, over time, if something becomes unreadable, unless you pay, the lot owner wants to pay for it to be restored and has the record of what it originally says, we don't always know. Here is what this monument said. It said, Margaret Pine, a slave to the family of Wynant van Zandt, deceased, formerly of Little Neck, Long Island, died August 4th, 1857, aged 80 years. So now that you know what the inscription was, can you please again put in the chat something you now think you know, or are guessing, oops, or are inferring about Margaret Pine? Or a question that you have. So Martha's noting that she was Black. And this is something we're inferring because she is enslaved. She's said to be a slave. She lived a long time ago, born in 1777. All right, so we're doing some math here to figure it out. What was her birth date? We know her age, but not the exact date. So Rich Rago is bringing some background knowledge, knowing that the Van Zandt family was originally from Brooklyn. It's important for the Van Zandt family to show that she is enslaved to the family. So thinking a little bit about who may have decided on that language. Did her Black family place this grave, or did her slave owners place this grave? Excellent question. She dies before the Civil War. It seems odd that coins are on the grave due to the meaning of that. She remained with the family even until after slavery. So Janice is also bringing in some background knowledge. There's certainly information out there to that effect. So the family cared for her because they spent the money to make a marble headstone, even though she was enslaved. So some kind of relationship where the family felt that they should create a gravestone for her. Is she in the 1850 federal census? Rich, we will look at some census data on her. She's buried with other family members, her family members, or the enslaving family's family. This is the question. As far as I know, it's only members of the enslaving family, not her biological family. All right, so there's a lot of things we're guessing and wondering about Margaret Pine. So Larry, Wynant is not there. Wynant is in the vault in the Zion Episcopal Church in Little Neck, which is where his retirement home was. All right, so let's dig deeper into this. I will also say as a little bit more backstory, and I know I'm probably, Jen, am I going really long here?
It's okay, it's okay.
Okay.
This is interesting.
A little backstory on this also is that one person at Greenwood took it upon himself to reinscribe these words on a new monument that was in place for a while and might still be, but it's being removed because the effort was to not forget her story and to show people that she was here. But as we're doing today in this program, we want to see what more can we do for her memory than keep her locked in this frame of just being a slave to another family. We want to resurrect her memory. If we're going to resurrect her memory at all, let's think about her and what we can know about her, and not just her in relationship to the people who held her in bondage for her whole life. So that is what we're going to try to do today. And a place that we might start, that you may start with any person who has died, is by looking at an obituary. Let's see if that's actually the next slide in my slideshow, because I'm proving to not remember. All right, well, so, okay, backing up a little bit more before we look at obituaries. This is what we're going to try to do with her memory. We're going to do exercises in historical thinking. Again, doing the kind of thinking and the kind of work that real historians do when they're approaching history and trying to tell someone's story. What sources exist to tell her story? We know she's enslaved. If we have any background knowledge about slavery at all, we know that there are not going to be that many sources, either in her hand or expressing her feelings because of the limits placed on enslaved people in their lifetimes. How can we apply historical thinking skills, sourcing, close reading, corroborating evidence, contextualizing evidence to whatever sources we can find? After we review sources about Margaret Pine, what do we know, infer, and wonder about her still? How do our questions change over time? when we're looking at these sources, what bias can we detect? What information are we going to trust? And what information are we going to be skeptical about or distrust? Can we make a narrative of her life that goes beyond the words on this monument and that centers her and not her enslavers? And what more information might be out there that we haven't even thought to look at yet because we haven't formed the right question to ask? So we're going in a moment to read an obituary that actually does exist for Margaret Pine. And obituaries are a really fascinating type of historical document to work with when you're doing history with kids. And so I thought we would start by me modeling how I read an obituary of Charles Van Zandt, who you will see plays a role in the obituary of Margaret Pine. So here, I'm going to read it out loud to you. Dr. Charles Van Zandt, obituary. In our yesterday's edition, this is from the Brooklyn Daily Eagle, we referred to the death of our late respected fellow citizen, Dr. Van Zandt. The following additional particulars will be of interest to the public. Dr. Van Zandt was born September 18, 1798. In his early days, the doctor entered the Marine Service in 1813, and during the war with England was taken prisoner by Her Majesty's frigate Belvedere and carried into Bermuda, where he was held a close prisoner for 6 months. In 1820, when Dr. Van Zandt entered the office of the celebrated Dr. John W. Francis, who died not long ago. In 1825, he graduated at Rutgers College with the highest honors. In 1832, when the Asiatic cholera made its appearance in the city, he tendered his professional services to the poor gratuitously. And for the great benefit he conferred on, and the benevolence he displayed, he received a handsome testimonial from the bands of his fellow citizens. In 1834, he was appointed Deputy Health Officer of the Port of New York and was for many years the physician of the King County Jail. Dr. Van Zandt lately conceived the idea of once more returning to the scenes of his boyhood days and purchased an elegant mansion at the head of Little Neck Bay called Van Zandt's Point in memory of his father, Wynant van Zandt. On Saturday last, while the doctor was attending to some matters near his residence at Little Neck, he suddenly felt a pain in the region of his heart and retired to his house in haste, where he called upon his wife for medical aid and retired to lay down on the sofa, and in a few minutes expired. Thus, another old Brooklynite has passed away. His sudden demise will be regretted by a large circle of friends and acquaintances. All right, so this is an obituary of Dr. Charles A. Van Zandt. So some questions here. What claims are being made about Van Zandt's life? Let's take a second for people to just list something in the chat. What claims are being made about his life? I'm gonna actually narrate this for you just to make this go a little faster, because you're gonna do this with Margaret Pine in a second. So the claims that I'm seeing about Van Zandt's life are where he was born, that he was in the Marine Service and was a prisoner of war, that he studied with a very esteemed doctor, that he had graduated from Rutgers College with the highest honors, and that he had very important jobs, that he helped people with recovering from cholera, that he worked gratuitously for the poor, so he was a charitable man. He showed benevolence, that he retired in Little Neck, where his father had a home, where he grew up, and that he had some kind of heart episode from which he died, and that his friends, he had a large group of friends who will miss him. Now I'm going to look sort of closely at the words that are being used in this to describe him and the other people in his life. So respected fellow citizen are some words I see. I see that he studied with an esteemed doctor, that he worked for, that he showed benevolence, that so there's a lot of words here to kind of show that he was a very important citizen, a respected citizen, and a benevolent citizen. The actions that are being described are actions that he took in his professional life, that he was a soldier, that he was a doctor to the poor, that he worked in a jail. Do I trust this information? What do I trust and what do I not trust? So I am going to say that when I read something like this about a prominent and public citizen, I'm going to say that the information presented about his career trajectory is probably fairly accurate, because this would have been a public figure whose career trajectory was probably well known. He probably had information about him conveyed by his family members that survived him. We see that his wife was still alive at this time. So there would have been people to correct the record who are being interviewed or who are giving this information. But certainly, the characterizations of him as a good person, these are things that the person writing this is trying to either establish the values of a society, that we, should respect doctors that are working pro bono, who are veterans. And then it's also, of course, conveying potentially the language given by people who knew him, who are invested in keeping his memory in good standing and in portraying him as a really decent human being. The other questions I would want to know about him says nothing about if he has children, says nothing about what he did in his retirement or his youth. There's a lot of chapters in his life that do not appear here. I do see the conversations in the chat too about why would he need an enslaved person. So we don't know yet that Margaret Pine was enslaved to him per se. So now that we've had a chance to look at the obituary of Dr. Charles A. Van Zandt, Jen is going to put you guys in some breakout rooms to look at an obituary that was created for Margaret Pine.
And we've just I'll put you in breakout rooms in a minute. We'll have about 8 or 10 minutes in the breakout rooms. We've just put a link in the chat. You want to click on that link where you'll see a series of more links for each breakout room. So when you go to your breakout room, just watch to see to see what number of breakout room you're in. And then you'll be able to click on that link from the link we just sent you and see your Jamboard. I'm going to quickly give you a peek, if you haven't used Jamboard before, at what that will look like. So let me just go to Jamboard here. So your Jamboard will look like this. And you can scroll through slides of the Jamboard at the top. So there's some instructions at the beginning to, as a group, read through the obituary of Margaret Pine, and click on the arrows at the top of this screen to advance. So you'll be able to read through this. Don't worry, this is small, but on later slides, there's like enlarged paragraph by paragraph. So this is her obituary. And then we have some prompts. And it says use sticky notes from the menu on the left to share your responses to these prompts. So there's a series of questions here, and you can add sticky notes here. So I would just add a comment on a sticky note and save it. And my apologies, group one, I just put an extra sticky note on your Jamboard. But you can go through and see paragraph by paragraph on the Jamboard if it's easier for you to add your comments there, your analysis, like Rachel just modeled for us. So that being said, I am going to, just going to put the link in one more time in the chat to everyone, so that I make sure we all have it. And then give me a moment while I sort out our breakout rooms. Sorry, one moment. I need to fix this. In the chat, if you're having any trouble accessing that link, just let me know and I'll send you to breakout rooms in a minute. anyone is having trouble getting into their breakout room, let me know.
Hey, Jen.
Hi.
Sorry, I didn't know I was going into a breakout room, so.
Sorry. Something, 1 minute.
Okay.
And there we go. And Sandra, I can see your comment in the chat. If you're having trouble, you should have received a message to go to your breakout room. Let us know if that's not working. And Christina, it looks like you managed to stay out of the breakout room. Thanks for your message. I'm sorry I couldn't do that manually on my end.
Thank you.
Something has like changed in this Zoom menu, and I was like, "Where's my option to remove Christina?"
No, that's okay. I didn't realize that there would be breakout rooms, and I actually have parent teacher conferences in like 10 minutes. So I plan to come back and forth in between the conferences. So
Yeah, totally.
I didn't want to join a breakout room and then be totally silent.
Recording and hand it back over to Rachel.
All right. So I would love to hear from a representative from at least a couple of groups. I don't know, we're not going to be able to hear from, I think, all breakout rooms in this moment, just because we have a ton more sources to show you, and I don't want to miss that, and I want to respect people's time. But I would love to hear a share out of what you guys discussed, and you can pick, any one of the questions that you answered, any of the sort of biggest takeaways you had about that that obituary of her. And I also would really encourage just hearing from, if there was a voice in your group, someone who didn't get to share a lot, but who was doing a lot of listening and getting really to take in what everyone in the group was saying, that might be the best person to sort of share out what your group was talking about. So inviting just any voice that maybe didn't get enough time to chat because we were in the breakout rooms for so short of a time, or go ahead and Jen will unmute you and you can share out.
Yeah, feel free to raise your hand if you'd like to chat. We just have folks muted at the moment to avoid extra background noise, but happy to unmute folks.
Use that raise hands feature, right?
Yeah, you should have an option to raise your hand in the participant list. Yeah, go ahead. Cam, I think I just gave you permission to unmute.
Hi. So what I was thinking about Mr. what's his name? Van Zandt? Yeah, setting her free. At first I didn't believe that she didn't want to go, but then I thought about it. If her dad gave her to him as an infant, she probably had like no family or any other place for her to go, and maybe that's why she didn't want to leave from his home.
That's fascinating. So you started out thinking like, well, that's obviously nonsense. Why would she not want to have her freedom?
Be free? Yeah.
But then you reconsidered thinking, really looking closely at the content there. Maybe she just didn't have other options.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And Ben, I see your hand up. You should be able to unmute now.
Yeah, something, sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry, something I noticed was there's some line where it mentioned she had black skin but a pure soul. The doctor says she had a black skin but a pure soul, and that kind of showed. It demonstrates to me the idea that they have this positive conception of her, but it's still rooted in this very prejudiced view of race from that time. So even though it's positive, it's still kind of I guess prejudicial in its own sense, or rooted in this kind of sense of racial superiority.
And did you notice also that he is the son of Wynant van Zandt, and it says she is the nurse to all of the sons. So he's saying that about the woman who helped raise him.
Yeah. Daniel, I see your hand raised. Let me know if you can unmute now.
Yeah, one thing we noticed in our group was, obviously it's a little uncomfortable sometimes reading these things. But in the block quote from Van Zandt, from Wynant van Zandt, it says like, oh, the bearer of this card is my servant. So at first it seems like it's a card to like claim ownership of her, which it obviously does. But it's also like this might be used for her as like an ID card as well. Was something that like, right. And I think someone put that in the chat, like, was it to like claim ownership over her and to protect her, or just one or the other?
Yeah. And Janice, I see your hand. Do you want to unmute yourself?
I just wanted to reiterate what the first speaker said, Kim. I was in group 2, and we also, that also struck us about the line where she refused to manumit herself, and we were making some inferences that perhaps because she was older, that she really did not have the means to support herself, and the understanding, you know, could have been, no, you need to support me at this age because I just don't have the means to support myself.
Yeah, yeah.
And Larry, I see your hand as well. Go ahead and unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Very uncomfortable to read all of that, I would say. But two things. There was a question about whether we thought that the information that we were reading was accurate. You know, they supplied quite a bit of information, like some dates. It seemed like it was a pretty accurate component. They do use the word country. I'm wondering if they meant the word county. But it seemed like a pretty accurate depiction. I would agree with most of it if you know, just by how many details there were in it.
What specifically did you guys in your group feel was a claim that seemed believable and accurate? And that's not to say that I'm taking a side, but just, can you give an example? Larry, would you mind sharing more? Or if you're talking, I don't think I can hear it. Oh, you may have lost Larry.
Sorry.
There we go.
Oh, there you go. Sorry. I'm sorry. I thought you heard me. I was just saying that, you know, it was very detailed in that there are specific dates in there and locations. So it seemed like it would be based on those dates. You'd probably be able to do some further research to see that they're probably fairly accurate. Dates of those times would have been off by a little bit here and there too, and people lied about their ages, but but for the most part, I think there's enough information in there to make someone believe it.
So the dates that you're thinking of, like you were accepting as likely to be true, the date of 1813 when she was supposedly given a document where she could choose to be free or not and go work for wages, and the date of her death, are those the dates?
Yeah, and so they had the age of, they had 79 years for the individual from Long Island. They had the date of birth at 1778. She left at 1813. So there, you know, that's a lot of dates there, I think.
Lana's noting that her date of death was different on her tombstone and her age at death was different. That's going to be a theme you'll see in some other sources that we look at. And there are
Fairly common.
an enslaved person's date of death may not always, or enslaved person's age at death may not always be knowable, even to the people who enslaved her.
I think maybe we have one more comment from Michael, and then maybe we can take a look at those other sources.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
So I teach a text called The History of Mary Prince, and it's a slave narrative. She's from Bermuda. And one thing that I teach with it is something called the Cult of Womanhood, which is this notion that women were supposed to embody 4 characteristics. And those characteristics are piety, purity, domesticity, and submissiveness. And it was very common for slaves for it to be very important for them to embody these things. And certainly the obituary portrays her with piety. That was something that my group came up with. And they sort of really imply that she was pure and submissive. I mean, I think the idea of turning down an offer to be free, if that's accurate, seems submissive. The only thing that I didn't really touch on was domesticity of those 4 characteristics. But I definitely think it makes it, our group decided to make a big point. I mean, the writer of that obituary really needed you to leave feeling this was a pious woman.
And your group, I was also lucky enough to be in your room, Michael, and your group was also pointing out that there was skepticism over how true these words were, because they seemed to be in the voice of someone who had a stake in her slavery rather than in her own voice.
Right. There was
is that accurate to my summary?
Yes, there was that language that's like, you know, she requested to, where is it? There were these words, he willingly consented or something like that. So we were like, you know, it almost sounds like, all right, if you really insist on being my slave, you can be my slave. I will do that for you. That's what it sounded like with those words.
Thank you all for sharing. Jen, really quickly, before they go to the Padlet, just one comment, which is fascinating to me that no one has mentioned so far, which is the very first line of the obituary. A claim is made that she is, quote, the last slave in New York. I'm just curious, like, can we just have a quick show of hands or something? If people picked up on that, if there was discussion about that. I want to get you guys to the Padlet, so we don't have to talk about it now, but that's interestingly the claim that Greenwood picked up on. And that was the reason that someone in the public brought Margaret Pine to Greenwood's attention. They said, hey, did you know that the last slave in New York is buried at Greenwood?
I'm surprised they had any slaves.
And buried in Greenwood?
In New York, I mean, it wasn't the point of the movie 12 Years a Slave that this man was in New York where slavery was illegal, and he goes back to Virginia or North Carolina someplace just to visit somebody, and because slavery is legal there, he gets captured. He says, no, I live in New York. I'm not a slave. I can't be a slave. I live in New York. And they say, well, you are one now. That was that movie. So I'm surprised that New York had any slaves.
Yes, this is a common misconception that northern cities did not participate in slavery. And if we had 100 hours, we could get into all the many ways that New York participated in slavery. I want to turn you guys over to the Padlet, which is a group of sources that you'll now examine. There are instructions in the Padlet, but the idea is to focus on 1 or 2 sources there, and they're divided into types of sources. That adds to the story of Margaret Pine's life. And you can add comments in the Padlet.
Yeah, so I don't know if you want to share your screen at all with the Padlet, Rachel, to show folks what it looks like, but we are going to use this Padlet and give folks maybe until 1/4 past the hour to look at it. And there's some prompts on there for thinking about the sources that appear and how they might add to our understanding of Margaret Pine's life. Yeah,
So I'm sharing, am I sharing my screen now, Jen?
you are.
Here you can see that we have cemetery records, census data, and there's transcriptions at the top here of, there's an 1850 national census and 1855 state census. We've got wills, various wills of family around the Van Zandts and portraits, and we have places and laws. So there's a lot of material here, and you will not get to look at all of it probably in this PD, but you will have access to this afterward. Is that correct, Jen?
Yeah, totally. We will share a link to this tomorrow.
Yeah.
There's like 100 hours of content here.
But just pick a source, and a source that stands out to you, and spend the next 5 or so minutes thinking about how it adds to our understanding of Margaret Pine, and what new information you have, what new questions you have. You can add comments in the Padlet if you want.
I really love Tanya's comment that there's so much that she wants to know about her, and that the obituary is really more about the Van Zandts. I hope that we're able to find out more about her through these other sources. I know everyone's disappearing now, but just love that comment from Tanya.
Yeah, and we're actually not going to head to breakout rooms for this part. We'll all just kind of hang out here, but you can silently, I'll put the link in the chat again, just go and look at the Padlet yourself, contemplate a source. We're all still here, so if you have questions that you want to share in the chat, go for it. And we'll see your updates on the Padlet as well. I see some comments coming in. I'm just looking over at the Padlet on my other screen here. I love seeing the analysis and the questions that folks are adding. Oh, well, I know that was like a very short amount of time to look at this, but I don't know if we want to share out um, some of the comments that were added, or if folks want to share in the chat or raise their hands again to share their observations or feedback.
I'm just going through and reading some of the comments people are adding. Census seems to have lots of comments.
Let me see Jessica's question about whether there are any photos of Margaret Pine. Not that we found, right?
Yeah, not that I know of. I mean, that this it's so important. I can't overstate enough that what I said at the top of this presentation, which is that we have just begun to research her. And so there's, just because it's not here doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just means we haven't looked for it yet. And this is why learning how to ask good questions is so important to doing historical research. Maybe we aren't asking the questions that would allow us to find a photo of her. Thinking of the kind of source material that there would be. Although I will say that she died in 1857. That's only a few years after the invention. Ooh, did I freeze?
Yes, you froze momentarily, but you're back.
It's only a few years after the invention of photography. So given background knowledge about enslaved people or even freed people who were not wealthy, I would be surprised if we find a photograph.
And a couple of other comments up to the census. According to the census data, she was illiterate up to the point of her death. There's a lot of details about the family, especially. Rich, yeah, I can't decipher who was her undertaker. Rachel, I think we were looking at that as well, and we couldn't figure out the name of the
Let me take
undertaker.
one more look.
Did you?
I can't see from this, but I can maybe get that information to folks later.
Yeah.
So should we, does anyone want to kind of discuss anything or say out loud anything that you're learning here that makes you rethink some of the conversations you had about the obituary, rethink some of what you thought you maybe learned about her in the obituary? Is this changing your view of her life, adding to the picture of her life? Does anyone want to raise hands and share? Jen, are you able to see? I don't know if there are any.
Yeah, I don't see any raised hands at the moment. I'm just thinking for myself, it makes everything more complicated. There's like a lot more little details and thinking about the family and the context she was working in, the details about her life, and it makes you realize that nice little story that's told in her obituary that's very well contained is perhaps, well, I mean, it's obviously not the whole story. No one's life is just 4 paragraphs. And Larry said in the chat, it changes his perspective about the Van Zandt family. He grew up on the street in that area named after them.
And can I take a couple minutes to just point out a few things that, since we're short on time, folks may not have time to connect these dots.
Mhm.
All right, so some of the sources that we found about Margaret Pine's life, I just want to take a couple minutes to explain. I want to start with the wills. So if you'll remember, the claim was made in the obituary. Also, before I talk about this, I want to make a note about language. I know that the obituary uses the language of slave and owner and master. That's not my preferred language to use when I'm talking about slavery now. And generally speaking, in academic circles now, we use different terminology. So instead of slave, we would say enslaved person. Even if it's awkward, it doesn't mark the person as like their identity as a slave. And instead of an owner, we would use an enslaver or master. We would say enslaver. So I just want to note that when I'm talking about this. Charles Van Zandt, who seems to be one of the people at least involved in the writing of her obituary, because he's arranging the funeral, seems to think that she was enslaved in the Van Zandt family from birth. And I don't know if anybody could put this together from looking at the wills, but she did not, was not enslaved initially by the Van Zandt family, but by the Underhill family. So there's already information that whoever is contributing to her obituary is getting wrong, doesn't know about her origins. And it shows you something about how maybe the details of her life outside of how she served the enslaving family were not important to them. Not important enough for them to really get right, not even in her obituary. So she is enslaved at first by Israel Underhill, who initially wills her to his wife Abigail, but they die in the same year. So that is how she ends up coming to be enslaved by Maria Allaire Underhill, who is married to Wynant van Zandt. And we also can see here another thing that is not mentioned in her obituary, that we likely know the identity of her parents and potentially a sibling. So I don't know if anybody caught on to that, but in the Underhill family, there were enslaved people named Pine and Hugor, or who, I'm not sure how you pronounce it. But a boy named Charles. So Hugor is mentioned as a wench, Pine is mentioned as a man, and Charles is mentioned as a boy. And then later on, Margaret comes into being about 3 years after Charles. So the likelihood is that Pine and Hugor are her parents, and that Charles and Margaret take the surname of Pine. So that's an interesting thing to know. We don't know if she had children. No one has mentioned that. Certainly at the end of her life, census data shows her living alone. Also, the first claim of that obituary is that she's the last slave in New York. There's just no evidence to back that up in any way that we can see here. She is living free in 1850. Everyone technically was by then. Certainly there are instances that you've heard about that one can hear about from time to time, people not being informed of the end of slavery. There was a type of Jim Crow certainly in New York as well. So people's lives may not have been that different under if they had been enslaved beforehand. Certainly for Margaret Pine, she's illiterate. She's 80 years old, living alone, working as a washerwoman. So this is not a woman who had a lot of options in life. I think Kim was mentioning that in a couple other groups, that idea of like maybe she just didn't have another choice and she wanted to remain enslaved so she had some kind of protection. And that's possible. It's hard to say because we have so little other evidence of her, and there's so many other questions that are raised by that obituary, so many other inaccuracies. So I just wanted to point some of that out, that we do find her living free, that slavery, as you can see from the laws of New York, was banned in 1827. So I don't really know how they come to the conclusion that she was, quote unquote, the last slave. It's completely unclear. And I wouldn't reiterate that statement about her. So just wanted to offer that. Also, I noticed people talking about how maybe she was living in comfort based on the places here. And it's interesting to consider, even if the homes themselves were comfortable, we don't have things from her voice. So we don't know what comfort looked like for her. We don't know what her living conditions were within these places. We think that she never lived in Little Neck because she probably went to New York in 1813 and never actually lived in that country house. the manor house. So if you hear my 3-year-old just came home and is screaming, "Mommy, where are you?" and I'm ignoring him. So just if you hear that, I'm an okay mom. I'm just gonna ignore him for a minute. I'm in the back room, sweetie. I'll be out in a minute. Please don't come in. So any other comments? I'll take myself off now. Any other comments from anyone else?
I saw Chloe comment in the chat about the manor house and Little Neck, and like, would she be traveling back and forth from Manhattan to there? It's a really good question. Janice was curious about if she spoke English or Dutch. And yeah, Stacy mentioned, like, I wouldn't consider the living conditions of any enslaved person comfort. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very important. We always talk about this, and I'm sure you do in your own classrooms, that there's no such thing as good slavery and no such thing as good slave owners.
Yeah. I know we need to wrap up in the next few minutes. And Rachel, I know you had some great ideas on what teachers could do with information like this in the classroom. Do you feel like you can, I don't know, encapsulate any of those in 2 or 3 minutes?
I'll just share my screen for a moment and just take you through some ideas that I had for how to take this into your classroom. I hope these are helpful. So I know that we're a mixed age group here, so not all of these sources are probably going to be decipherable by all ages, but think about the sources that would work for your students. Think about how you would frame them. What information would you tell the students to contextualize them versus what would you want them to discover through reading the source on their own. And then some activity ideas are rewriting an inscription for her monument. What would we put there? That's an activity we do at a lot of Greenwood programs. We rewrite epitaphs or inscriptions on monuments for how we think a person should be remembered now, or we add to their memory. How would you rewrite her obituary today? What would an obituary look like now? And Jen is going to put a link in soon, but there's a great New York Times is doing a thing called Overlooked, where they write obituaries for people who didn't get them before. So there's a great parallel one for a woman named Mary Ellen Pleasant you could compare with Margaret Pine. How would you reorganize the sources in the Padlet into a timeline of her life? And then, of course, continue doing research. What would church records show? We haven't even looked at those yet. So, there's probably so much more to learn about her than we have been able to find out here. Yeah, that's all I basically wanted to say. I hope you guys have enjoyed this. Thank you so much for coming. I also want to mention, and I think Jen has the link, that Greenwood is doing virtual school programs. We are doing in-person programming starting in April. We are doing free programs every Wednesday at 11 that anyone can sign up for. They're recommended for grades 4 through 12. And also, if you email me, rwallman@greenwood.com, if you want to book a program, email me, say you are a part of this PD, and I will give you 15% off one program, virtual or in person. I hope this was interesting. Thank you so much for attending.
Thank you so much, Rachel. And I know some folks were just hopping off to get to parent-teacher conferences. So thank you for being here. Yeah, good luck. And I want to invite you to join us for a future workshop. I've just put in a link in the chat for our next workshop on legacies of Dutch colonial Brooklyn. We'll be talking more about how we talk about this colonial past on April 27th with our friends from Wyckoff Farm. I also dropped a link in the chat to our newsletter, as well as the info for learning more about Rachel's school programming at Greenwood. And I'll share the link again for CTLE credit. So Patricia, I saw your comment in the chat. You can click on the survey link that's just above your comment. That will allow you to give your feedback on today's event and to indicate if you'd like CTLE credit. CTLE certificates will not be emailed out to you until the week of April 5th. We appreciate your patience on that. You just need to wait a few weeks to get caught up on that paperwork. Thank you for being here with us today. You are free to go. If you need that survey link for CTLE credit. I've just put it in the chat again, and I'll hang around here. Rachel and I will both hang out here for a little longer if you have questions or if you have trouble with the survey. Please get in touch. But otherwise, thank you for being here.
But yeah, Tanya, good idea that maybe there's a portrait of the family. I don't even know if Tanya's still here. That she could be included in. I looked high and low for portraits beyond the ones that I included, but it's always possible that there's something I didn't find.